All right, guys, welcome back to EMPM. That stands for Engineering Major Philosophy Minor, the channel where you can get a working aerospace engineer's opinions on topics pertaining to engineering, philosophy, politics, and various other social and cultural issues. As you can see in this video, I'm working again on the county of Citrus Valley. I'm continuing to build out this freeway exchange right here, and then finally, at the end of this episode, that freeway exchange will be complete. And then the second part of this video will be just doing some simple landscaping, putting out some trees and bushes and stuff in the dense downtown area that we've worked on expanding in the past with all the skyscrapers. This will also be the last video where my talking is, at least in the beginning, is not really coherent with the mouse movements and things like that. Because I actually recorded the city planning ahead of time, and I recorded audio over that, and then I wanted to switch over to this new method of doing things. So in this video, I'm going to read you guys a little article or column that I have, whatever you want to call it, that I've written about this idea of peaceful divorce. Now, before I get into this, I do want to make a statement regarding some of my previous videos where I've been a little bit more animated, but then especially about this topic in general. I want to make it clear to people that I do not advocate for any sort of physical confrontation, any sort of violence out in the streets. I, again, have been pretty animated in my previous videos, and the reason for that is because I do want this to get you guys thinking. I do want it to rile you guys up a little bit, and I want it to invoke passion in you guys, but not to go out and commit physical, cause physical conflict or commit, physical acts of violence. But what I do want is for it to give you guys words and language to speak up and voice your opinions on things like this. And, honestly, not be afraid to take a little bit of a life inconvenience or life consequence for speaking your mind. Because the thing is, we need to combat bad ideas with good ideas. And the only way we can do that is through speech. And if only a small fraction of us really speak up and voice our opinions and make it understood that some of the things that we're going through right now culturally are really alarming a lot of us, then not only will no one know, but, people will assume that they just need to go along with, a majority point of view that may not actually be the majority. So, again, guys, no physical conflict, no violence. We're going to talk about peaceful divorce, and we're going to talk about why it probably can't be that peaceful. But again, I just want to clarify things. I want you guys to be animated, passionate, involved, and voice your opinions. But I want this to all be verbal. And this is a war of ideas, guys. This is not a call for any physical action. So that said, let's go ahead and get into it. When people say they are okay with a peaceful divorce, they are really envisioning something more benign, a mutual breakup. Said mutual breakup would be the culmination of a relatively short-term relationship, 3 months or less, where neither partner was at the I love you stage. The couple may have both been pursuing a rebound, something which is a great topic for another video, and there is a modest chance that a sleepover had not yet occurred. The conversation was never extremely contentious. Both wanted the other to like them, at least superficially, so they avoided topics that would lead to fundamental differences in worldview. They were not together long enough to have a serious argument, but despite many conversations of high energy, laughter, and agreement, there was never a burning desire to probe deeper into each other's beliefs. To say they were comfortable around each other was to say the woman did not feel that there was an imminent threat of physical violence. At the same time, she did not have the compelling desire to flee into the man's arms for warmth, protection, and comfort when watching a horror film, for example. In turn, the man also did not feel the pressing desire to sacrifice his life's resources and accomplishments for this woman. More simply put, he did not have any thoughts of her being the one. The man was perfectly content pursuing his own excellence, building personal wealth, and getting jacked. The relationship was somewhat casual, a date or two a week, coffee, dinner, a walk after work. But when all was said and done, it simply did not work out. Both decided to go their separate ways, with slim to no chance of seeing one another in the future. If in the distant future their paths did cross and they had found new romantic interests, there would hardly be any jealousy. A 2 out of 10 on the jealousy scale maximum, but nothing which would jeopardize their current dating situation. They greet each other, exchange some obligatory small talk, and then return to their separate ways without needing to claw at the other person to continue a strange, there's still a connection here situation. This indeed sounds peaceful, but it is not a divorce. For most of us, the scenario described is a whimsical daydream that is imagined for the separation of the United States. Admittedly, I have this daydream too, but we must recognize that elements of this daydream belie the description of peaceful. My opinion on this subject shifts regularly, but at the time of writing this column, for lack of better words, I entertain the idea of separation hyperbolically. Divorces in which both parties simply walk away amicably are extremely rare, and if you've talked with any of the graybeard engineers around your department, you'll find them frequently using the phrase, "You're never really divorced." Generally, this sarcastic remark is said playfully, but the reality is child support, alimony, and disputes over those issues and many others are frequent and contentious. Understanding why peaceful divorce will almost certainly initiate violence or terminate with violence is not a large leap of faith. Elaborating on this claim is the purpose of this short article. First, let me pose the question, why does the suggestion of peaceful divorce exist in the first place? It makes sense that the qualifier is peaceful, since the vast majority of people want to avoid conflict altogether, with a small percentage willing to engage in conflict only when it is absolutely necessary. However, the desire for divorce is slightly more complex. Consider the following situation between a married couple that may cause division. This scenario is picked at random out of my metaphorical hat. The husband wishes to send his children to a religious private school, and the wife wishes to send her children to public school. The husband's reasons for religious private school include a myriad of specifics, including instilling virtue, teaching the good of the American bargain, higher academic standards, and a culture of discipline which is consistent with the household expectations. The wife may also have a strong rationale. The costs of public school are lower, at least up front. She wishes for her child to learn about diversity and inclusion, and she feels that the standards of discipline are too harsh. There could be a debate within this article about each specific, but it serves this discussion better to focus on a point of contention that exists at a higher level. One foundational point of dispute in this situation is the presence and role of religion in the household. If one spouse does not believe that religion is valuable, where the other values religion above many other metrics when making a choice on their children's education, it's easy to see that there's a fundamental impasse of core values. Setting religion aside for a moment, consider the fundamental difference between seeking an individual merit-based program, typical grading scale, core academic standards by which each student is judged individually, and discipline based on individual action, versus a group membership-based program, tailored merit based on group membership, assumption of incompetency based on group. Regardless of which opinion you may align with in that scenario, one can see how a simple decision of school choice can bring fundamental differences in core values to the forefront of a relationship. This idea can be applied directly to divorce seeking that is present among the United States. The states, as individual participants, have fundamentally different core values and beliefs. It might be fair to point out that historically many differences were reconciled by presence of state sovereignty, which allowed for dissipation of federal power. This idea can be applied directly to the divorce seeking that is present among the United States today. Today, the states as individual participants have fundamentally different core values and beliefs. Take, for example, illegal immigration. For the past few decades, state leaders generally agreed that the USA should have borders and unlawful crossings of the border should result in deportation. Another example is freedom of religion, or at a bare minimum, a general aim toward preferring a godly way of life. Finally, states today disagree on the fundamental roles of the federal government. The list could proceed to cover at least another 2 or 3 topics, but the conclusion is clear. Much like a married couple encounters difficulties when core values are opposite, the United States is currently undergoing a similar situation. We have such dissimilar philosophical outlooks on basic tenets of the nation's establishment, interpretation of the Constitution, and the role of federal government that peaceful divorce seems to be a logical conclusion. However, what is illogical about referring to the divorce is that it can be peaceful. Thus, we circle back, Jen Psaki style, to the daydream we have about an amicable breakup, when in reality, what we are talking about is divorce. There are a few reasons why peaceful is not in the cards for our specific predicament. Number one, the country is more integrated geographically in terms of left and right than most of us assume. Number two, the economic dependencies are considerable. Number three, the federal government has a dog in the fight. And number four, as Jordan Peterson put it in a recent interview, and this is me paraphrasing, the profane and the sacred modes of belief become conflated. Certainly, the most interesting point from a philosophical view is the last one, which plays a large factor to tie all these ideas together. But for a moment, let's examine the first three in more detail. Many of you have likely examined a color contour plot of the United States, which has a scale ranging from dark red to dark blue, with contour designations in between. The map has black lines that denote the county boundaries rather than just the state boundaries. In general, what these plots reveal is highly concentrated small areas of dark blue containing large urban cities among what many people refer to as a large sea of red. Red areas tend to be more rural with less overall population. With the county map in mind, imagine what the map would end up looking like from a state or newly founded country perspective that accounts for all the small excursions of blue with red in between. Disagreements over which land belongs to who, where the boundaries are, and what happens at those boundaries would almost certainly result in conflict. Consideration of the conflict itself would also come into play. Strategists on either side would seek to include natural boundaries that provide security, water access, and cohesive transportation routes. There is a chance that these negotiations could occur in a civil way, where participants sit around a table, perhaps end up flipping the table, walk out for a breather, and then come back and shake hands, but I contend this would be extraordinarily exceptional. Discussion of geographic integration and boundary drawing leads well into a brief discussion on economic dependencies. Consider aerospace and defense manufacturing, which is one of the most lucrative U.S. exports. A company like General Electric Aviation sources parts and assemblies from many different states with different political affiliations and ships them to a location for final integration. Imagine a shipping route which normally would take a 12-hour drive increasing to a 15-hour drive due to different regulations in different areas. As it stands right now, truckers can cross state boundaries relatively efficiently, stopping at way stations without having to provide citizenship information. How about farming and agriculture? The reason why grocery stores are able to stock a variety of locally out-of-season produce is because the stores source from a variety of states with different climates. Imagine a situation where one newly founded country wishes to deprive the other newly founded country of certain agricultural products over a politically charged difference of opinion. On a side note, the whole process of the free market is to provide mutually beneficial exchanges of goods and services completely independent of personal disagreement. One can surmise that disagreements over the operation of the free market could spark physical conflict, as those disagreements do today. Interference with the free market has much to do with the fact that the federal government has incentives of its own. Generally, when the federal government is run in a conservative fashion, the government incentive is to keep itself out of people's personal lives. Often, taxes go down, regulations are removed, and individual state power trends upward. However, the incentives of the federal government currently are much different. The federal government wishes to increase taxes substantially, expand regulations on businesses, regulate aspects of personal and family life, increase dependence on government, and overall centralize more federal power by imposing universal edicts. The former style of federal governance lends itself well to states wishing to form their own union. In fact, disobedience of the federal government may even be welcome. This is often the challenge conservatives face when taking on political positions. We generally start justifying the elimination of our own jobs. However, the latter style of government is extremely reluctant to have a competitive force in terms of policy and economics. This is due to the fact that the federal system relies on a large tax base in order to finance its ever-increasing number of institutions. Furthermore, supporters of federal expansion are generally reliant on federal expansion. In this type of climate, supporters typically do not accept a live and let live attitude, since personal and federal incentives have coalesced against their peers. Instead, compulsory submission of peers is desired. Anyone who has watched the movie 300 knows that the word submission to free men is a very dirty word. It is a call to action for defense of liberty and territory. Confrontation frequently occurs in such situations. The optimistic perspective is that either group only considers the other group an infuriating annoyance, and so there is a chance conflict will not transition from verbal to kinetic. But the final point in this discussion is what pushes the analysis over the edge and makes a peaceful divorce impossible. Constructing my thoughts about exactly what Jordan Peterson means by the profane and sacred is certainly difficult. Not because I don't believe Jordan, but because this is a complex topic which needs to be boiled down into one or two paragraphs, and I do not fully understand the constituents. Let me first attempt to define the sacred mode of belief. I interpret sacred to be the deeply spiritual, for some religious, convictions which an individual holds. This includes such individual considerations as what one considers to be divine, beautiful, and aspirational, as well as what one considers to be hellish, satanic, and evil. The sacred also reflects what one believes their own role is in the narrative they have constructed for themselves regarding how good and evil interact. A good way to characterize this for yourself is contemplating the archetypal story of the triumphant hero. The hero is required to build himself up, often from nothing, enduring many trials simply in preparation for one ultimate trial against evil. When an archetypal story is laid out in front of you in text or film, it is obvious who is the hero and who is the villain. However, in real life, it gets tricky. Allow me to expand on the profane for a moment. Profanity in the religious sense is voicing a denunciation or rejection of God. Googling the term gives one definition as relating or devoted to that which is not sacred or biblical, secular rather than religious. To reject God can also be thought of as rejecting judgment. Taking this one step further, rejecting judgment is to reject standards, general hierarchy, and spiritual preference. The difficulty with the profane is that the archetypes of hero and villain become irrelevant. There, in fact, is no criteria that can determine hero or villain because criteria imply standards, hierarchy, and preference. The devil is in the detail with this point quite literally. For the most part, human beings are psychologically wired to desire the hero, to long for archetype, narrative, and a religious role in myth. But lacking a coherent definition of hero allows individuals to define themselves as heroes in their own regard without a reference frame. Anything and everything which is determined to be opposite of, quote, hero, unquote, is then fair game for the title of villain. When the sacred and profane modes of belief become conflated, the traditional value hierarchies and archetypes are summarily reduced to rubble and replaced with the licentious, imaginary, and morally relative profane archetypes. Psychologically, a projection of the sacred still exists in the spiritual longings of the individual. The longing to declare oneself a hero who has overcome great tests to overwhelm villainy. But sacred villainy is not just any loudmouth or thief, but the embodiment of evil and Lucifer himself. In the Gulag Archipelago, Solzhenitsyn writes, "To do evil, a human being must first of all believe that what he's doing is good, or else that it's a well-considered act in conformity with natural law. When the sacred and profane are conflated, good is in the eye of the beholder, arbitrary and relative. If an action is well considered and in conformity with arbitrary natural law, then any means are justified to quell an opponent. The opponent is considered an existential threat, and it is therefore morally impermissible to allow the person to leave in peace. After all, their very existence is a threat, and messiahs eliminate threats." How many times have we heard the words existential threat followed by some version of perpetuated by conservatives? How many times have we heard obedience to external edict and mandate referred to as heroic and saving lives? The most philosophically unnerving reason why peaceful divorce is not possible is because conservatives will not be permitted to go in peace. We first must be saved. In conclusion, the daydream of separating the Union should likely be left as a daydream, since I do not think peaceful is a realistic outcome. If any switching of territory is to occur, it may be more reasonable to have certain counties switch state membership if desired. That said, my opinion is the best option is for conservatives to shed their fear of voicing opinions in a thoughtful manner. If protest is necessary, peaceful protest is the better option than allegedly peaceful divorce. All right, guys, and that is going to conclude this little reading, and I want to emphasize again that what I am talking about here is meant to be philosophical exercises in thoughts, and is not a call for any physical action, but more something for you guys to consider, and not just consider, but speak with me about, disagree with, or agree with. Tell me what your opinions are, and most importantly of all, voice what your opinion is, and have it be, your authentic opinion, and don't be afraid to discuss it. And I think this topic in particular is why conservatives tend to be a little bit pessimistic about the future, because we feel like we're not allowed to voice these concerns. We feel like, well, quite literally now, if we go against certain things, we are risking our livelihoods. And from that perspective, it's definitely a challenge to speak up, but you need to speak up and you need to do so in a tempered and measured way. Maybe not just, shouting to random people like I do in some of my YouTube videos, but, form a measured opinion and just talk about it and be willing to have the conversation, maybe not at first directly with somebody on the other side, but at least among each other, and try and find people who are like-minded, because they are definitely out there. And I definitely have found a lot of people in Utah who, even if they're not of the same opinion, are willing to discuss and willing to listen. Utah is different than a place like California, for sure. The population of people willing to do this is definitely a lot higher in Utah, especially in the area where I'm at. But still, try and find people who are on board with you, and just, speak what's on your mind with them. And at least then, when bad things happen, you'll have a community of people who, will support you. So anyway, guys, again, thank you for watching. We are obviously going to be doing more of this streaming, and I hope to get your guys' feedback and improve the process as well. So thanks again, guys, and have a good night. Later.